There's something I want to share today that feels more personal and more emotionally difficult than many of the topics I usually discuss about avoidant attachment. At the center of this conversation is a quiet question that hurts countless people without anyone else noticing. Am I the person they truly love, or am I just someone they keep as an option? This question rarely arrives all at once. Instead, it slowly grows during those silent moments when you compare what your heart wants to believe with what their behavior actually reveals. You replay old conversations, you study every message, you search for hidden meaning in the way they act, hoping to understand where you truly fit into their life. That kind of uncertainty becomes emotionally draining. And if you've been asking yourself this question, you deserve more than comforting words that only ease the pain for a little while. You deserve an honest explanation. Not one built on false hope, but one grounded in what attachment psychology consistently shows about avoidant behavior and what I have repeatedly observed over time. There are clear differences between the way an avoidant behaves with someone they genuinely love and someone they simply keep nearby as a possibility. Those differences are far more important than most people realize. But before we explore them, you need to understand something essential. Without this foundation, the similarities between these two kinds of relationships can easily mislead you, making the real differences appear much smaller than they actually are. So stay with me, because what comes next may completely change the way you see this situation. The truth is that avoidant people rarely express love in ways most individuals naturally recognize. Healthy, secure love often appears warm, dependable, emotionally open, and consistently reassuring. Avoidant love usually doesn't look like that, even when the feelings are completely real. That's exactly why both the person an avoidant deeply loves and the person they simply keep as an option may experience many of the same behaviors. Both may receive affection, meaningful conversations, sincere laughter, moments of deep connection, and times when the avoidant feels completely present. Yet both may also experience emotional distance, withdrawal, or periods when the avoidance suddenly becomes difficult to reach. This overlap creates enormous confusion. Two different people can experience almost identical avoidant behaviors, and both walk away believing they are deeply loved. The true difference isn't whether warmth exists. The real difference lies in how deeply those emotions run, and even more importantly, what those emotions cost the avoidant internally. When I talk about emotional cost, I mean the internal price that closeness demands from someone with avoidant attachment. Their nervous system naturally tries to protect emotional energy. It guards vulnerability, independence, and the inner resources that close relationships require. Most people never notice this part, but it changes everything. When an avoidant is involved with someone they simply keep as an option, they usually remain inside those emotional safety limits. The connection may be genuine. The enjoyment is genuine. The affection may even be sincere. But none of it forces them beyond what feels emotionally comfortable. They never have to stretch far beyond the identity they've carefully created around being independent, emotionally controlled, and self-reliant. Everything begins to change when they truly fall in love. Suddenly, they start paying emotional costs they don't experience with anyone else. They begin feeling emotions that become stronger than their usual coping strategies can easily handle. They catch themselves acting in ways that don't match the version of themselves they've depended on for years. Without meaning to, they become more vulnerable. They invest more than feels safe. They slowly reveal parts of themselves that normally remain hidden behind emotional walls. Those moments, when they move beyond the carefully controlled limits they've always protected, often become one of the clearest signs of authentic love from an avoidant person. It doesn't happen because they suddenly become fearless. It happens because their feelings quietly become stronger than the defenses they have trusted for so long. Keep watching, because the next difference is one that almost everyone misunderstands. The first major difference between the person they truly love and the person they simply keep as an option is surprisingly straightforward. With the option, the avoidant stays emotionally comfortable. That doesn't mean they don't care. They may honestly enjoy spending time with that person. They may find them attractive, intelligent, funny, interesting, and genuinely pleasant to be around. They can be thoughtful, caring, attentive, and emotionally available for certain periods of time. But the relationship never reaches the level where their deepest fears become fully activated. It stays within a range their nervous system already knows how to manage. Because of that, their behavior often appears more stable. They don't constantly move back and forth between closeness and distance. They don't suddenly disappear every time intimacy increases. Within the usual patterns of avoidant attachment, they can seem fairly dependable and emotionally present. Ironically, the person they truly love often experiences far less consistency. They become the one who feels the emotional highs and painful lows. They receive incredible warmth one day, followed by unexpected distance the next. They watch the connection grow deeper, only to see the avoidant suddenly pull away. That withdrawal isn't automatically proof that love has disappeared. More often, it reveals that the emotional intensity has become overwhelming for an unhealed nervous system, struggling to balance love with fear. As the relationship becomes more meaningful, the avoidant's internal alarm system grows louder. The deeper the connection feels, the stronger their instinct becomes to protect themselves by creating distance. This creates one of the most painful paradoxes of avoidant attachment. Sometimes the strongest pull away happens because the feelings have become the strongest. The more intense the hot and cold pattern becomes, the more likely it is that the avoidant is struggling with emotions that feel bigger than what they know how to regulate. That repeating cycle isn't healthy, and it certainly isn't easy to live through, but it often reflects real emotional investment colliding with deeply rooted protective habits. In other words, the more they have to manage their emotional response to you, the more powerful that response is likely to be. Ironically, a relationship that feels calm and emotionally effortless with an avoidant may actually carry lower emotional stakes. At the same time, instability at a deeper level can sometimes reveal genuine love pressing against the limits of an attachment system that still hasn't fully healed. Think about that for a moment, because this is where many people completely misread the situation. Stay with me, because the next difference explains why this matters even more than most people realize. The second major difference appears in the quality of their attention. Avoidant people pay attention to many individuals. That's why attention alone is never enough to tell you where you truly stand. The real question isn't whether they notice you, it's how they notice you. With someone who remains an option, their attention stays fairly broad. They appreciate that person's personality, enjoy conversations, remember certain details, and genuinely engage with them. None of it is fake. Their interest is sincere, but it usually remains focused on what can easily be seen. They notice your sense of humor, your opinions, your daily habits, your achievements, and the version of yourself that naturally shows up in everyday life. Their curiosity rarely reaches much deeper than that. With the person they truly love, something very different begins to unfold. Almost without realizing it, they become fascinated by what exists beneath the surface. They begin noticing your contradictions, the emotions you quietly hide, the fears behind your confidence, and the silent parts of your personality that almost everyone else misses. Their attention shifts toward your inner world instead of simply your outward personality. They catch the little things you reveal without meaning to. They hear the difference between your words and your feelings. They notice what remains unspoken just as much as what is actually said. Because avoidant people spend so much of their own lives managing hidden emotions, they often become surprisingly skilled at recognizing those hidden layers in someone they genuinely love. Most people overlook this completely, but it changes everything. That deeper level of attention creates an unusually detailed memory. They remember small conversations, emotional moments, passing remarks, and subtle shifts in your mood that even you may no longer remember. More importantly, they begin developing an emotional awareness of you that surprises even them. They quietly become tuned into how you're feeling, often sensing emotional changes before you ever explain them out loud. That kind of natural emotional attunement is something they rarely offer someone who is simply an option. It happens because, whether they're ready to admit it or not, your inner world has become personally meaningful to their own. They begin recognizing changes in your mood before you've even found the words to describe what you're experiencing. They respond to emotions you never openly express, showing a level of care that their avoidant mind never planned to invest. It's the kind of awareness they struggle to explain because it reaches far beyond what they usually allow themselves to feel. With someone who is simply an option, the avoidant notices you. With the person they truly love, they find it almost impossible to stop noticing you, even during the moments when they're trying their hardest to create distance. And that's a detail many people don't recognize until much later. The third difference appears in the way they respond to conflict. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of avoidant attachment because what most people believe is happening is often the exact opposite of what's really taking place beneath the surface. When conflict happens with someone who remains an option, the avoidant usually stays composed. They rely on the familiar coping strategies they've practiced for years. They emotionally detach, become highly logical, reduce the emotional intensity, and avoid conversations that require deep vulnerability. Everything feels measured, organized, and controlled. It may seem cold or emotionally distant, but in reality, they're simply operating inside their emotional comfort zone. Conflict with the person they truly love rarely remains that controlled. It becomes less predictable. Their usual emotional control begins to crack in quiet but meaningful ways. The calm exterior that normally appears impossible to disturb doesn't completely disappear, but it becomes much harder to maintain. Instead of responding with perfect emotional distance, they begin reacting from genuine feeling. Sometimes they speak before thinking. Sometimes frustration, fear, sadness, or vulnerability slips through despite every effort to hide it. They may say things they later wish they hadn't or reveal emotions they never intended to expose. Those reactions aren't always pleasant to experience, but they reveal something important. Their emotional investment has become stronger than their ability to fully control it. Someone who remains an option rarely has the power to break through those protective walls. The person they truly love often does. As uncomfortable as those moments may feel, they show that you've reached a place inside them where their usual defenses are no longer completely in charge. The fourth difference is something I haven't described quite this way before, yet I believe it becomes one of the clearest signs of genuine avoidant love over time. I think of it as a gradual return to honesty. With someone who remains an option, the avoidant can comfortably maintain the version of themselves they've carefully built over many years. They appear confident, emotionally steady, independent, capable, engaging, and completely in control. They continue presenting the image that feels safe because nothing inside the relationship forces them to question it. But when they genuinely fall in love, that carefully protected image slowly becomes much harder to maintain. Cracks begin to appear. They may admit fears they normally hide. They may reveal uncertainty instead of pretending to have all the answers. They become more willing to show imperfections, even if doing so feels deeply uncomfortable. Without fully realizing it, they begin allowing someone else to see parts of themselves they've spent years protecting from the rest of the world. That quiet return to honesty doesn't happen because they suddenly become fearless. It happens because their emotional connection has become more important than constantly protecting the version of themselves they worked so hard to preserve. And for an avoidant person, that kind of honesty is rarely given unless the love is real. That version of themselves isn't fake, but it is carefully maintained. It has been shaped over many years to protect them from feeling too exposed or emotionally vulnerable. The person who remains an option usually experiences that version consistently, but the person they truly love begins seeing someone very different. Not all at once, and not all the time, but through small moments that slowly become impossible to ignore. The carefully controlled image begins to crack. The real person quietly steps forward. The one who still carries emotional scars, the one whose independence was built as protection rather than simply part of their personality, the one who isn't nearly as unaffected as they work so hard to appear. Sometimes this happens through unexpected honesty. They suddenly admit something deeply personal before realizing they've said it aloud. Other times it appears through actions that completely challenge the independent identity they've always protected. They reveal longing, tenderness, disappointment, or quiet grief that they normally keep hidden from everyone. And sometimes it's simply the feeling of being with them during those rare moments when every emotional wall softly falls away. Their presence feels different, more genuine, more alive, more emotionally real than the carefully managed version you've come to know. Those moments matter far more than they seem because the person who is only an option rarely experiences them. They usually receive the polished version almost every time because nothing about that relationship requires deeper emotional exposure. Only someone who reaches the avoidant's deepest emotional layers creates enough emotional pull for the real self to emerge. And when that happens, what you're witnessing isn't simply a brief loss of composure. It's one of the closest things their inner world allows to an unspoken confession. Stay with me, because the next difference may be the most revealing of all. The fifth difference may be the clearest distinction you can recognize. It comes down to sacrifice. Genuine sacrifice cannot be faked, it cannot be performed just to create an impression, and it cannot exist without real emotional investment. With someone who remains an option, the avoidant generally doesn't sacrifice the parts of themselves they value protecting the most. That doesn't mean they aren't caring. They can absolutely be generous, thoughtful, supportive, and deeply considerate. They may invest time, affection, and sincere attention, but they don't give up anything that fundamentally challenges the identity they've built around emotional safety. Their self-image remains unchanged. Their emotional habits stay exactly the same. Their protective patterns continue working just as they always have. When they truly fall in love, something begins changing, quietly, gradually, often so slowly that neither person notices it happening at first. They begin giving up comforts they never imagined letting go of. They allow themselves to feel emotions they would normally shut down before they grow too strong. They slowly question the belief that they must always carry everything alone. In subtle ways, they admit that your presence matters. Your attention matters, and losing you would affect them much more deeply than they ever wanted to admit. They remain in situations that require emotional growth, even when every instinct inside them tells them to walk away. Those sacrifices are rarely announced. They don't ask for credit or recognition. In fact, they often resist every step because each one feels emotionally expensive. Yet over time, those small changes begin creating a very clear picture. Most people miss these quiet shifts, but they often reveal more than words ever could. You begin noticing small differences, tiny acts of vulnerability, moments where they choose connection instead of distance, times when they remain emotionally present a little longer than they normally would. On their own, those moments may appear insignificant, but together they become powerful evidence that something inside them is slowly changing. Someone who is only an option rarely inspires that kind of transformation. Only genuine love creates enough emotional pressure to gradually reshape the identity they've spent years protecting. Now, it's equally important to understand why being the option can feel so convincing. The person who remains an option often experiences an avoidant who seems surprisingly consistent. They're attentive, they're warm, they're enjoyable to spend time with. They remember small details, make thoughtful gestures, and often leave the other person feeling appreciated and genuinely valued. That's because in those relationships, the avoidant isn't constantly battling themselves. Their internal alarm system stays relatively quiet. Their emotional defenses aren't under heavy pressure. Nothing about the relationship threatens the identity they've built around independence and emotional control. Because of that, they're able to express many of their strongest qualities naturally. Their intelligence, their curiosity, their quiet kindness, their ability to listen carefully, their emotional insight. All of those strengths appear without constantly being interrupted by fear or emotional overload. From the outside, it can actually seem like the healthier relationship, especially when compared to the person they truly love, who often experiences distance, mixed signals, emotional ups and downs, and confusing periods of withdrawal. It's easy to assume the option received the better version, but the truth runs much deeper than appearances. The person who remains an option is experiencing the avoidant exactly as they are today, comfortably living inside familiar emotional limits. Nothing in that relationship asks them to grow beyond those boundaries. Nothing challenges the protective identity they've relied on for so many years. The warmth is easier to give because it doesn't require deep vulnerability. The consistency exists because very little inside them is truly being tested. The relationship remains emotionally sustainable precisely because it never asks for more than the avoidant already feels comfortable giving. A relationship with someone who is simply an option stays stable because it never reaches the emotional depth that would truly challenge the avoidant's deepest defenses. It remains comfortable because nothing inside them has been deeply shaken or forced to change. The option experiences the avoidant while they remain inside their emotional comfort zone. And although that version may appear warm, dependable, and easy to love, it isn't where their deepest self truly lives. The person they genuinely love often sees a much more complicated reality. They witness the fear behind the distance, the longing beneath the silence, the vulnerability hidden beneath emotional control, and the quiet battle between wanting connection and fearing everything it requires. That struggle isn't easy for either person, but it often reveals that something much deeper is taking place beneath the surface than most people ever realize. And once you understand that difference, you begin seeing their behavior through an entirely new lens. The person an avoidant truly loves experiences something very different. They experience someone whose emotions are challenging everything they thought they could control. They witness what happens when love becomes stronger than the protective system built to keep vulnerability locked away. They see the emotional cost, the private struggle, and those quiet moments when the carefully managed version slowly gives way to the real person underneath. Those moments are rarely easy to experience. They are often confusing, emotionally painful, and frustratingly inconsistent, yet they reveal a depth of emotional investment that only genuine love tends to create. Now, there's a question that naturally follows everything we've explored. Which one are you? I want to answer that as honestly as possible. The difficult reality is that the answer isn't always obvious, especially when you're living inside the relationship instead of looking back at it. I've spoken with thoughtful, emotionally aware people who sincerely couldn't tell where they stood, because avoidant behavior can appear remarkably similar in both situations. On top of that, avoidant people themselves are often not fully aware of how deep their own emotions have become. They live with conflicting feelings that create behaviors which are incredibly difficult to interpret with complete certainty. That's why no simple rule can give you a guaranteed answer, but stay with me, because the next questions may help you see your own story much more clearly. What I can offer are a few honest questions that separate hope from reality. Ask yourself whether your experience included the kinds of emotional costs we've been discussing, not simply moments of affection or kindness, because both the person they genuinely love and the person they keep as an option can receive those. Instead, look for the deeper signs. Did they ever unexpectedly lower their guard and reveal something deeply personal? Did they react more emotionally with you than seemed consistent with their normally controlled personality? Did they quietly make sacrifices that challenged their usual need for independence? Did they slowly begin changing small habits or protective patterns they had always held on to? When they pulled away, did it happen specifically as the relationship became more emotionally intimate, or was emotional distance simply a constant part of every interaction? Then think about the quality of their attention. Were they interested only in the person everyone else could see, or were they drawn toward the parts of you that most people completely overlooked? Did they remember tiny emotional moments? Did they recognize feelings you never said out loud? Did they understand the contradictions inside you without needing every detail explained? Those questions don't guarantee certainty, but they often reveal far more than people expect. Then ask yourself one final question. Did they ever find some way back to you? Not necessarily by fully returning to the relationship, maybe through a message, a brief conversation, a thoughtful gesture, an indirect attempt to reconnect. Any moment where their feelings briefly became stronger than the emotional walls they usually relied upon. Sometimes those openings are small enough to dismiss, yet meaningful enough to reveal what was happening beneath the surface. None of these questions can offer absolute certainty, but they can help you view your experience with greater honesty. And honesty matters because it allows you to make decisions based on reality rather than wishful thinking or unresolved pain. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to leave you with something that reaches beyond the question of whether you were the person they truly loved or simply someone they kept as an option. As important as that question may feel, I don't believe it's ultimately the most important one. A better question is this: was the relationship truly honoring you? Was it meeting your emotional needs? Was it moving, even slowly and imperfectly, toward a relationship where both people could safely love one another? Because being the person who awakened an avoidant's deepest emotions is not automatically the same as having a healthy relationship. That difference is one many people overlook.